Welcome to Sex Help for Smart People. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Juergens, former science professor turned somatic sexologist and intimacy coach. This podcast is all about using evidence-based practices to help high-achieving women and their partners of all genders get the affection, connection, and great sex you want. So let's get at it. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 7. Today we're going to talk about how to improve your sex life just by changing your vocabulary. So this is one of the easier things to change that can really help improve your mindset and your outcomes, letting you have more freedom and empowerment for pleasure, whether you're single or partnered. And it can also be a surprisingly massive game changer for relationships and dating. I'm really excited for you to get all the benefits of these simple changes. So let's do this. Alrighty, my darlings. I'm going to start with a little question today. I want you to ask yourself, how do I subconsciously define sex? And I mean like the default definition before you try to think about how you want to define it. So think my reflexive interpretation. When I read, so-and-so Kardashian had sex with so-and-so random dude, what specifically am I assuming happened? Okay, you've got a picture in your mind. Is this different, this reflexive definition? Is it different than how you might like to define sex or how you try to define sex consciously? And that's 100% okay for your answer to be yes or no. It doesn't make you a good or a bad person either way. But what we're going to do today is unpack what's in most of our heads subconsciously when we say or hear the word sex. And we're going to think about some other words, at least one other word, penetration today too. And we're going to look at how these subconscious ideas, just based on the English language, just based on our vocabulary, may not serve us in our own pleasure empowerment or in our relationships and sexual connection with others. And I'll give you some alternatives, and we'll just kind of unpack all this stuff together today. All right, little caveat, if I'm a little scratchy, little extra sexy in my voice today, I have been brutally sick. I hope none of you had the cold that I had, but probably some of you do. It was gnarly, and I may sound a little bit like I have a frog in my throat today, so bear with me. All right. The whole point here today is to help you have better relationships, more pleasure, more connection. And I mean, that's the point every day. That's why I'm doing this. And whoever you are, whatever gender, background, sexuality, partner status, changing your vocabulary, at least investigating your vocabulary, can really help you connect better with your own pleasure and with your partners. So to start, we're going to talk about why words matter for our brains and how the way we think and feel about everything in our lives can depend a lot on the language that we use. We'll unpack some hidden socialized meanings and problems around the words we commonly use for sex and penetration, and we'll look at how these words get in our way. I'm going to offer some alternatives to these two specific words in particular, and invite you to really open up a creative dialogue with yourself about how words land in your body and in the sort of practice of your life and the practice of your intimacy. This is going to help you not just change your vocabulary, but also how you think and feel about intimacy. It'll help you open up more to your own experience and your partner's experiences. And we're going to close, as always, with a practice that will help you implement these changes in your life and actually get the benefits, right? We can sit here talking about stuff all day, and many of us have done that for years and years in therapy or elsewhere. But it's really where what I love about coaching too is what we do in my practice is implementation. So even though this is a podcast, which means we're going to spend a lot of time talking, the little nuggets of practices I give you are just sort of tiny bits out of the type of practices I do with my clients. And those practices are really where the rubber meets the road, right? If you're trying to learn, for example, how to play soccer, we don't just open up a book, Soccer for Dummies, and expect ourselves to be great at it. Or at least I hope to fuck you don't do that, because that would just be setting yourself up for failure. But for some reason, we do that with all kinds of things, including any sort of new learning that we don't associate with practice. But, intimacy, sexuality, relationships are all embodied things. We experience them in 3 dimensions in our lives. So they require practice too. So I always give you a practice, and I want to really encourage you to do them. Okay, so back to words. We're going to talk about words a lot today. Why do they matter? Is this just what people would call, quote unquote, semantics? It's kind of a dismissive way, right, to think about words when words are so important in how our brain perceives the world around us. So not all of us think predominantly in words, but most of us do. And even those of us who think in images or in some sort of other, I don't know, who knows? There's probably all kinds of diversity out there in how people think. Certainly some people think in sensations, right? We have synesthesia, and we have various different types of wonderful diversity in how people think. But the vast majority of us do think in words, even if we don't catch those sentences, because they're happening subconsciously or very fast. Because we have been around language since we were born. And it is one of the primary ways that humans construct culture and make sense of the world around us is through descriptive language. And it percolates and permeates through our brains and our sense of what is happening around us, so that when we even if we're not a person who thinks in words, even if we think in images, we've been exposed so many times to the words for things that they still evoke particular images for us. So our words shape our perceptions, and our perceptions are what drive our emotions. So that means the way we feel about things really depends a lot on the words we use in our minds. So, for example, imagine your friend, or maybe you, let's just say you, are working on getting better at public speaking. You say this sentence to yourself: I am not a great public speaker. So try it out. Say, I am not a great public speaker, to yourself, just in your mind. How does it feel? It's kind of an asshole thing to say, right? You'd never say it to somebody else. You're not a great public speaker. I mean, you might. You might not say it to your best friend, though, right? But when I say it to myself, I feel underconfident. I feel unsure of myself. Sort of that sense of, I'm not sure that I can ever learn to do better, and it may not even be worth it to try. That sense of underconfidence, right? That's the feeling of not being sure, underconfidence. Now, what if we say to ourselves instead, I am not a great speaker yet? How do you feel now when you say that in your brain? I am not a great speaker yet. There's one tiny word difference. And yet, pun intended, it makes all the difference, right? There's a feeling of possibility, of determination, resolve, maybe. This idea that it's possible because you left that yet in there. So that's just an example of why words matter, and words matter to our experience. Okay. It's not just the addition or subtraction of the word that matters. It's the way the meaning changes with that yet, right? In that example. So it's not just the words themselves, their dictionary definition, but it's the meaning that they give to us. And that's the big power of words, not just their strict definition, but the meaning we assign. The definition plus, this is really important, the connotation. And the connotation is just the implication of the word, the implied meaning, idea, or feeling that a word invokes in addition to its literal meaning. Okay, so unless we've done active work on it, we are all walking around with very unhelpful socialized connotations in our heads about sex, sexuality, our own bodies, other people's bodies, simply because of the words we use when we talk and think about them. And, this is actually one of the many reasons that having a coach can be so life-changing. And it really was for me and one of the reasons I still have a coach, because it's really hard to see from the inside, from your own brain, how your own self-talk or perceptions are limiting who you get to be in this life. And everyone has different ways of using our learnings throughout our life, our socialization, against ourselves and undermining ourselves in ways we usually really can't see very well from the inside. So if this is a little bit new or uncomfortable, it's totally okay. If it's familiar, the process, you'll still probably learn something because these words are so pervasive, right? Today, we're just going to focus on two very simple and yet very profound and nearly universal words for describing sex, including the word sex itself and the word penetration. And these are just tips of the old iceberg, as it were, but they're really important chunks. And understanding your own default socialized thinking around these words, considering some alternatives, can free you in ways that literally transform relationships with yourself and with lovers. So we're going to start with the term sex. If you Google the definition, and I'm talking about sex between people, not biological sex based on organ configuration, sex between people, you'll get quite a bit of variation by dictionaries based on how thoughtfully they've edited recently as the culture starts to slightly, barely, incrementally shift. But some, so Oxford, for example, are just outright defining sex between humans as sexual intercourse with a penis in a vagina. Literally. That is exactly how they define it. They are, by the way, also completely wrong in their definition of biological sex. And forgive me for my little biology professor soapbox moment here. Oxford says there are only two categories of biological sex, which is frankly completely wrong. They say that humans and most other living things, quote unquote, fall into these two. Also wrong. Because not only are there plenty of intersex humans out there, but actually most other living things are asexual microbes in which sex doesn't even exist. Sex is just one strategy, this ability to recombine DNA during reproduction is not the only strategy for reproduction. It's just one, and loads of plants and animals do it by having both male and female sex organs in the same individual, or even switching sexes as they get older. So real-life biology is much wackier than the incorrect people at Oxford will tell you. But back to the between people definition of quote-unquote sex. So Cambridge is a bit broader and more accurate in their literal definition. They call it physical activity between people involving the sexual organs. Okay, great. I'm down with that. The connotation for the vast majority of people, regardless of dictionary definition, is still penis and vagina intercourse. And, even when we go to some place like Planned Parenthood, well-established liberal organization, they're defining anal sex, and these are sex educators, right? They're defining anal sex as penis in anus. And again, as if everything centers around the penis and there are no other options. And I can promise you, including all y'all people at Planned Parenthood, that women have anal sex with each other all the time without penises. So that definition would be news to a lot of queer women. But this male-centric view, the penis being the central action figure, and sex is occurring because there is a penis, and by the penis, just think about that. How that deprioritizes anybody else involved who doesn't have that equipment. And often we think sex is even over because a penis has ejaculated. That is the most common way people in this culture mark when sex is over. And I'll say all this applies to our lovely F word. So when we say we're fucking someone, it has the same connotation. When two people with vulvas having sex together, we're often inadvertently thinking still about insertion with a toy, fingers, whatever. Though, just out of not having a penis involved in those scenarios, we often have gotten a bit more out of the mindset than your average hetero couple if you're talking about two people with vulvas having sex. So by default, through our language, we are inadvertently prioritizing the male experience, male orgasms, and our idea of what gets men there, which we assume by default to be sticking their dicks in someone. And this is a huge problem for a lot of reasons and for literally everyone, regardless of your gender and regardless of whether you have a penis. This is still a problem. Yes, it's also a problem for men, and I'm going to break down why. So first of all, it's obviously a problem for women and people without penises who mostly get pleasure in very different ways. We know of minority of women actually orgasm from internal stimulation. The vast majority, at least 70%, require direct stimulation of the external part of the clitoris to orgasm. So when we as a culture define sex as an act that doesn't even include women's pleasure pathways, that is a problem. It is a problem. If we are inadvertently centering the penis and the penis experience and focusing on insertion, or, as we'll get to later, what most people call penetration. All right, number 2 of why this is a problem. Defining sex that way also puts a ton of pressure on everyone to get to that part, the penis in something part, as if it's the end-all, be-all, the sort of top of the mountain, whatever bullshit, as if you can't enjoy another view or a different mountain or a different hillside, right? When we define sex that way, we're saying, well, if we didn't get to the sex, quote unquote, we didn't have sex, right? And we're told in our culture that, having sex is important for relationships. Having sex is, for many people, kind of a point of pride, being a sexual adult. But what if what gives us pleasure isn't defined as sex by our culture? So it also puts this sort of underlying pressure of as if it's somehow a tease not to do that activity, as if everybody's supposed to get there to this penis and orifice place, or we've somehow failed, right? And that is a problem. That is a big problem, and it creates a lot of pressure especially on women, but it also creates a lot of pressure on men. And this whole thing, so number 3, this is a problem for men. This definition of sex being focused on a penis getting inserted into a vagina or an anus assuming people with penises only want that. And our culture also really thinks about that as validating manliness, right? Having that experience or getting to have that experience regularly. And it puts a heck of a lot of pressure on people with penises to like sex that way, as if they're supposed to like sex just that way. And it puts a lot of pressure on erections. So when erections come and go, which is really common, and at some point in every person with a penis's life, they are going to have erections coming and going, all of a sudden there's something wrong. Because he's supposed to love this one thing, either me as the partner, I'm doing something wrong, or there's something wrong with him if the erection's coming and going. And neither of those things are usually the case. Your partner's not doing anything wrong, and there's actually nothing wrong with you if your erection is coming and going. That is a really normal situation. But it becomes pathologized because we have all these expectations of what sex is supposed to be, how men are supposed to quote unquote perform, what they're supposed to like. So all that pressure does not help erections, I can promise you that. So we can take a ton of pressure off everyone and simultaneously open everything up for way more pleasure, especially for women and people with vulvas, but for everyone, by changing what we expect and what we think we are doing when we get together with a partner. And look, you can consciously work to just redefine what your subconscious assumes about the word sex, but it takes a lot of work and massive repetition to consciously redefine what your subconscious thinks about a word. So the short-term fix and an easier way is actually just to pick new words. So I want you to just imagine something we'll call sexy time or body playtime. And this is where you get together with a partner and you are just focused on exploring what feels good to you both. The sensations, the play, the energy within you, between you. There's no obligation to escalate towards any particular activity or to reach any sort of penis insertion. But you can if you both really want to. You let everyone find their hell yes in any given moment. In each moment you say, what am I a hell yes to? And you follow that together. So I call this either sexy time or body playtime to distinguish it in our minds from our default assumptions about quote unquote sex. And it's super different than what we often think of as sex. But if it's exactly what you think of and what you already do, then I just want to give you a shout out and congratulations, hats off, because you are a wonderful exception to the unfortunate norm. But for most people, we're not doing body playtime. We're not having the freedom of just sexy time, playing and exploring what feels good with no obligation to escalate in any particular direction and no end zone. So I want to invite you to try this out. Invite your partner to body playtime or sexy time, if you have a partner. Let them know what it means and see if they're interested in trying it out. And, probably having them listen to this podcast is the easiest way to explain, but you can also explain yourself. If you're dating, see if you can rethink in your brain how you might approach new partners from an interest in, body playtime with no end goal or obligation. Sexy time instead of this sort of, are we gonna fuck thing? And if you're single and not considering sexy time with another person at all right now, see if you can bring the idea of body playtime or sexy time into your fantasy life and self-pleasuring and kind of just imagination of how you might approach your eroticism. Okay, so a little more briefly, we're going to also unpack and challenge the word penetration today. So this word, I will tell you frankly, kind of drives me nuts. Even sex educators use this term, and without a lot of reflection on how problematic it is. And every now and then I hear people say, oh yeah, it's kind of problematic, but what else are we going to use? As if we couldn't get creative, right? So let's look at what penetration implies for a second. What is it? What body part does penetration center? That's right, folks. We are back to centering the penis. The penis being the action itself that is, the action character here who is supposedly doing this penetrating. And let's actually break down what is happening when a body part like a vagina or an anus is receiving a penis. Is it really being penetrated? When I think the closest equivalent of a vagina or anus receiving a penis in another body area is like our mouth kind of eating a banana, right? When you are eating a banana, are you thinking, this banana is penetrating my face? I'm going to be really shocked if that's what you're thinking, and if that makes sense to you. If you can imagine a banana penetrating your face. Because it actually sounds like, when you think about that, it sounds kind of dangerous to me, right? Like you've gotten some sort of super, either like a metal or like a sub-zero frozen banana projectile stuck through your cheek. It sounds violent. It sounds needlessly violent. And it sounds like the banana is in control of the whole situation. So same thing with vaginas and anuses, right? From the receiver's perspective, there is actually something completely different going on. Just like with your mouth, you are eating the banana, and a vagina or anus is really actually engulfing or swallowing or enveloping a penis. There's actually an active motion there of that receiving organ. And when you think of it that way, we realize it's actually a mutually vulnerable position. There is something actually taking in the penis. It is engulfing it. But the word penetration makes it sound almost militaristic and violent, and definitely one-sided on the vulnerability side of things. So it's really important to unpack needlessly violent terms, and it's especially important for people, those of us who have been either sexually assaulted or threatened with it, which is a large portion of the population. I would say a majority of the population has either been threatened with it through culture or actually had sexual assault. So this is one place where we can improve our nonviolent communication skills by not constantly, evoking this needlessly one-sided sort of violent idea through our terminology. Now, I'd love it if English had a great word for this sort of engulfing or enveloping that just really centered the receiver here. But we don't really. Those words, I think, are a little cumbersome. Hey, would you like to do some engulfing? Could I engulf you with my vagina? It feels a little awkward. So I would love to have that, but, and if you like those words, go for it. Absolutely. Personally, for me, I like to use the term insertion. It's easier to say, it's not violent, and it's very neutral from a receiver or giver side. It also way better describes what's happening. We could absolutely insert a banana into our face. It sounds much more consensual. So I will use the term here, and you've probably heard me already do it, insertion style sex, when I'm talking about putting any sort of object, toy, penis, whatever, inside a vagina or an anus, or a mouth for that matter. So I invite you to try that on and see how it feels. And, what we're doing here is what I generally spend a lot of my time doing, which is unpacking the patriarchal connotations of our culture and how they've impacted people, impacted our intimacy, our ability to connect with ourselves and with each other. And today we're doing it through a couple simple words. I want to just be clear that no matter who you are, you didn't choose these connotations. None of them are your fault. It was all chosen for us way before we were born, just through the relationship between language and culture. An English language reflects the cultural biases of historical English and Anglo-colonial culture, which include all that shit like, Puritanism and white supremacy, as well as patriarchy. So that's where the connotations are rooted. And you've absorbed those connotations simply through being an English speaker. Now, sometimes if English, for example, is your second language and it was learned later in life, you may have absorbed less, like fewer, it may be a shallower depth, these connotations. But that also means you've got whatever biases are baked into your first language too. And there is no language that doesn't have cultural biases. So look, this doesn't mean we're all intentionally holding up these biased values, but it does mean that we're all unintentionally using them against ourselves and each other until or unless we unpack that and choose a different way. So these two words are just one place, but I think a really important place that we can get the patriarchy out of our minds and relationships and start liberating ourselves, our self-image, our sex lives, and what we feel like is possible for us in intimacy and pleasure. So your exercise for implementation. The way we implement shifts is to practice. So just like I said before, everything in life, learning, especially embodied learning, comes through practice. And practice is easiest if we approach it with play, if we let it be fun. So I want to invite you to set up some sort of intentional body playtime or sexy time session at least once a week. And think about doing this for a minimum of 6 weeks to ingrain a new habit. Practice using the new words, inviting your partner or yourself to body playtime or sexy time until it feels like just a default habit. And that's when you know your brain has really shifted and you've gotten the benefits. So when you do this with yourself or a partner, you want to focus on just following whatever you are a hell yes to in the moment. Or you might, explore. I could be a yes to that. Let's try it out. Ask your body, am I a yes or a no, right? But letting go of expectations for any specific activities, getting curious, being playful with your exploration, and allowing that to be how you approach your sexy time with your partners. So I hope you enjoy, and I'll be here again for you next week.
If this podcast was helpful for you, please consider going to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leaving a 5-star review. Not only do I really appreciate your time doing that, but 5-star reviews really boost the show visibility, which helps people just like you who need it be able to find it. Thank you so much. I'll see you here next week.